Welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Marie Latoulipe, and I'm the Director of Science Programs at the Institute for the Advancement of Food and Nutrition Sciences, or IFNS. And today we are hosting the third and final program in our series that is focused on optimizing information to enhance consumer health and wellness. And in this series, we're learning about consumers and how they interact with nutrition and food safety information. Today, our speakers will cover recent studies that have assessed how consumers make sense of food and drug information that they encounter, as well as looking at efforts to mitigate misleading information. First, a bit on IFNS. We are a nonprofit organization that advances food and nutrition science for public benefit. And the way we do that is we bring together scientists from different sectors to identify areas of common interest, and then they develop programs and projects around those areas. And as an organization, IFNS does fund research, and we also convene experts to deliver a variety of different products. And those include competitively funded research, workshops, dialogues, and we always aim to produce a peer-reviewed publication from our work. A quick note on logistics. Hopefully you noted we are on the Zoom platform. So if you wish to ask a question, you can click on that Q&A tab at the bottom of your panel, enter your question in there at any time. We have disabled the chat for the participants, so you can only enter text into that questions box. Those will only be visible on our side, not to the entire audience. And then we'll come back to that and address as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar. So with that, we are excited to introduce Dr. Brian Southwell, who is a distinguished fellow at RTI International, where he oversees research to assess risk perceptions, mental models of scientific concepts, and public trust in science and scientists. And Dr. Southwell serves as an adjunct professor or a faculty member with several institutions, including Duke University, UNC Chapel Hill's Gilling School of Global Public Health, and the University of Delaware. And Dr. Southwell has also served on several National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine committees, including the Standing Committee for Advancing Science Communication. So Dr. Southwell is going to kick off the webinar today with some comments about the series and RTI's work, and then introduce our next two speakers, Stephanie McInnes and Kristen Giambi. So we'll turn it over to you, Dr. Southwell.
Great, thanks, Marie. It is really a pleasure for us to collaborate with IFANS on this larger webinar series, of which today's talk is one part. And we'll get into all that in just a moment. I just want to offer a word of context and additional background for folks that might be new to RTI as an institution. RTI International is an independent nonprofit research institute. We are based and headquartered in North Carolina, where we've existed for just about 70 years. RTI actually originally was part of Research Triangle Park and its founding, and originally RTI stood for, and still does, Research Triangle Institute. So it's a wonderful place to do a wide range of work that we're going to talk about, some of which today. So today we're going to continue on our discussion here of ways in which we might think about how research can be translated and the implications of research for optimization of information to enhance consumer health and wellness. And before we get into that, I do want to offer just a couple of disclosures. So if we move to the next slide. Today we're going to be talking about a number of different studies. But the ones that you'll hear about that were directly funded, that we should disclose, were projects that were funded by the Food and Drug Administration, and we'll talk about those in that context when we get to that point. So if we'll move to the next slide. So just as a reminder, for those of you that haven't been with us as an entire part of this whole webinar series, in the first couple of webinars, we spent some time thinking about innovations in measurement with regards to consumer behavior, with regards to perceptions of risk and benefit information. Today, we're going to move a little bit outside of the laboratory to think about the wider information environment and the ways in which we might make sense of what's out there, what consumers are engaging with, and also to talk a little bit about efforts to help consumers to both navigate that information environment and to make sense of some of the claims that they may have encountered there. And so we'll talk about that in a series of 3 parts here in our webinar today. So with me today are a couple of additional colleagues from RTI International, Stephanie McInnes and Kristen Yambi. And I'm really happy to have the chance to work with both. They are going to talk to you about a range of work that we've been doing over the last decade or so. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Stephanie McInnes.
Great. Thank you, Brian. And hi, everyone. So today for this first part of the webinar, I'll be talking about how we at RTI do work to explore consumer perceptions with social media listening methods. Next slide. So we know that in the United States, most people do use at least one social media platform, and they're spending multiple hours a day online. So ultimately, this really means it's a place with historical and real-time conversation among a variety of different people. So as a result, researchers really can get a sense of what people are saying about specific topics, how they are saying it, and ultimately, social listening allows us to tap into this conversation as a data source. One of the most beneficial elements of social media data as a data source is not only the real-time nature of the data, but the kind of authentic, unfiltered look as well. So the way that we tap into online conversation with social listening as a research method is by gathering and analyzing social media data to understand how people, organizations, and communities discuss topics and specific issues. Typically, this method leverages specialized listening platforms such as BrandWatch and the Meta Content Library. The Meta Content Library in particular is for researchers. You have to apply for access and it is not available to the general public. So really these platforms offer a great look, an in-depth look at the data available online. A lot of these tools do use text analysis tools as well to collect and analyze conversations, identify trends, topic clusters, and more. So these platforms are increasingly incorporating AI as well to enhance data collection and analysis in the research. Next slide. So social media listening really can be used in a variety of different ways and serve different purposes. So at RTI, we have commonly used social media listening to provide surveillance and market intelligence, to conduct formative research, and then also to track campaign performance. So these are kind of the main 3 pillars of social media listening and a lot of our work over the past decade. The surveillance and market intelligence informative research work streams are often most useful when gathering information about how consumers use specific products, as well as their knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs about topics such as potential products. Also, social media listening, something to keep in mind is it's often triangulated with other data sources such as literature, focus group data, interview data, etc. But really serves as a great starting place for research because it helps us understand the larger context of what people are saying before designing and specifying additional research activities. Next slide. Social media listening can be particularly useful in the food and nutrition space for many reasons. 2 reasons include conversations and regulations really evolving in real time. Currently, we're absolutely seeing that, and really social media offers a rich data source in this context. Additionally, conversations on some platforms, definitely not all, but For example, platforms like Reddit are organized in a way that helps understand who consumers are. So, although many platforms provide extremely limited demographic data, we can garner some indications of who people are based on the information they're sharing on specific platforms. For example, there are subreddits that are specifically, are vegans for vegans to talk about, how and have conversation. There's also subreddits for individuals with allergies, individuals with specific chronic health conditions. And so ultimately, this does give a little bit of insight into who these consumers are and what they're facing in their daily life. So in some previous work with clients, we've leveraged social media listening for a variety of different food and nutrition topics. One being understanding consumer use experiences, including those related to allergy restrictions and underlying health conditions, while using novel products such as alternate proteins, sweeteners, dietary supplements, and more. So in some of this work, we also did some qualitative coding of social media data and conducted stratified analyses with social media and other data sets. So these were a few methods that are ultimately very useful in social media listening, as well as custom dashboards. So at RTI, we've built a number of custom dashboards. With social media data, it can be really helpful because of the real-time nature of the data and dashboards actually updating in real time. And so this can be very helpful for ongoing monitoring of conversations and identifying emerging trends in real time. Next slide. To continue on that custom dashboard element with social media data in particular, we are able to customize, data visualizations, exports, and more to meet the needs of the user, which are very different depending on the topic and the research questions. So ultimately, we have been able to design original data visuals that map and analyze data really according to those key research questions. While some dashboard elements are designed to really drill down into social media data, there are also many features that can be implemented to explore data as well, with filters, segmentations, and even additional data sources. So these provide a level of interaction and transparency when folks are interested in exploring social media data in their own time as well. Next slide. So among the many topics that we've explored, some general insights while looking into novel products in particular with social media data include learning that one, influencers and ads really had an impact on overall social media conversations for the product categories we were exploring. Two, consumers were really excited around new types of alternate protein products being released. And three, many users online described having pre-existing health conditions that informed their consumption habits or were generally health conscious consumers aiming to improve their overall health and or physical performance. So these findings were monitoring and surveillance insights ultimately, and part of an effort to track the overall information environment around novel products. So while this is not comprehensive of everything we learned in detailed findings, we really wanted to highlight how this research with social media data can really be helpful for informing additional studies as well. Specifically for this, finding out that there was an impact of influencers within this topic area. Identifying consumer desire for new products, what people were looking for, and then also specified population segments that may be of interest for additional formative research activities. Next slide. So this work also provided insight into how people talk about certain products. For example, alternate protein was a topic area where consumers often mention and differentiate products by the manufacturer and brands. While on the other hand, when consumers were talking about other products, whether that was, cannabis, supplements, etc., they almost never mentioned brands or anything really specific aside from just that one term. And so, as you can imagine, this is really helpful context when determining how to even describe certain products to consumers in, say, an interview or a focus group. Really meeting the consumer where they are and understanding how they are speaking and labeling some of these products when they're talking about it in conversation. So as you can see, social media listening, it's really a great way to start with those broader questions, really investigating a larger context and ultimately helping you to identify specific research questions, potentially audience segments, and more for future research studies. Next slide. And although some folks, are really interested in looking for surveillance and market intel, we also conduct rigorous research with social media data, and our methodology has been published in some peer-reviewed journals. Specifically, those that I've included are about our approach to AI-assisted qualitative coding with social media data, as well as an age segmentation with an age prediction algorithm that was developed at RTI. So this research provides some transparency into methodology used in social media listening and further, some innovations that we're working on. And so I really encourage you all to scan the QR code, take a look at these articles, and hope that this is helpful in understanding really how social media listening can be used in this food and nutrition space where there's a lot of conversation and a lot of questions that consumers ultimately have. And with that, I will hand it over to Kristen.
Thank you, Stephanie. Now that we've talked about social media listening, we're going to dig into how consumers engage with digital advertising for a bit. So the United States is the largest digital advertising market in the world, with a revenue of about $317 billion in 2024. Much of this advertising consists of display ads, social media ads, search engine marketing, and email marketing, often with interactive components to target the 96% of US adults who go online daily. Interactive advertising can be defined differently depending on the context, but generally speaking, an interactive ad encourages consumers to interact with the ad and thus the brand rather than just passively view an ad. With the increased presence of interactive advertising in digital and social media, we think it's critical to understand how consumers are engaging with these types of advertisements and whether interactive features influence consumer recall, awareness, or comprehension of product claims and risk disclosures. So over the next few slides, I'll provide a couple of examples of the work that we've been doing on this topic. So we have conducted a systematic literature review to examine consumer engagement with interactive advertising and if interactive features influence consumer recall, awareness, or comprehension of product claims and risk disclosures. And we found that the level of engagement by consumers varied across studies, which probably isn't too surprising. Click-through rate was the most common engagement measure used in this review. However, the way in which click-through rates were calculated varied from study to study, which limited direct comparisons. The click-through rates we did find ranged from 0.02% to 2.3%. Other measures of consumer engagement beyond click-through rates included number of page views and interactions with an ad, such as liking, sharing, or posting comments to ads on social networking platforms. For example, one study reported that a greater percentage of viewers clicked on an ad or post when they saw it was associated with the name of a friend who'd already liked the social media page. Another study that was an eye tracking study examined the number of visual fixations on an ad and found that higher interactivity significantly increased the number of ad fixations. Most of the work examining the influence of these interactive features on consumer recall, awareness, and comprehension is experimental studies, which we examined through another systematic literature review. The included studies in this review manipulated the ad stimuli to vary the level of interactivity or the type of interactive features included in the ad. Some of the studies found significant associations between higher levels of interactivity and higher memory scores and comprehension. Other studies found the opposite, better recall and higher memory scores with fewer interactive features. Importantly, we also found instances of confounding. So in addition to manipulating interactivity, advertisers often manipulated other aspects of the ad not related to interactivity, such as tone, text, or graphic content. Thus, feature studies evaluating variations in interactive ads should ensure that the study designs and ad manipulations are robust for evaluating independent effects and potential interactions. Now I'm going to share a project example that's related to consumers engaging with risk information on prescription drug social media pages. And while it's focused on prescription drugs, we do think that learnings from this project can be applied to the food industry. Social media has become a source of information about prescription drugs for many consumers. And as we heard from Stephanie, also being used as a good data source to learn about products in the food industry. Between July and November of 2020, this industry spent $198 million on Facebook promotion and $151 million on Instagram posts. A nationally representative survey of over 1,700 US adults found that 26% of respondents had seen a prescription drug advertised on social media in the past 3 months, and 9% had watched a video on the web about a prescription drug on social networking website. Another survey of 1,000 US consumers found that 9% had used social media to evaluate new treatment options, and 7% used social media to look for reliable information about medication side effects. So, and despite all these increases in the volume of digital drug promotion, the amount of research on consumers' use of and trust in prescription drug promotion on social media is scarce. According to Food and Drug Administration regulations, when drug benefits are promoted, drug risks must also be described to achieve a fair balance. Ensuring a fair balance on an interactive medium like social media, where there could be character space limitations, targeted newsfeed advertisements, and consumer interaction through comments, shares, and likes, is challenging. Pharmaceutical companies currently present risk information, which they often refer to as safety information, in promotion about the prescription drugs they promote in a variety of ways across social media platforms. For example, companies may use links to provide access to risk information, such as a link to the drug's external website or a link to a PDF file with the full prescribing and medication guide. Risk information is also sometimes conveyed in a featured text post, a scrolling video post, a risk information pop-up, or a highlighted story. Even when this information is displayed in various locations, different UI or UX features of social media platforms may still inhibit consumers' ability to find, review, and comprehend this information. So we conducted in-person interviews with 54 consumers, and we segmented them into groups by device type, which was laptop or mobile phone, social media platform, which was Facebook or Instagram, and then age. The interviewers then asked participants to navigate to and review a series of 4 pharmaceutical drug pages and 3 posts on their assigned device and platform. We then had an analyst review the video recordings of the observation periods to abstract quantitative interaction data on whether a participant clicked on or viewed risk information at each location on each of the pages that they looked at. So what did we find? 59% of participants using Facebook and 70% of participants using Instagram viewed risk information in at least one possible location on average across all the pages tested. There was no single location across the Facebook pages that participants commonly clicked on to view risk information. On Instagram, at least half of the participants consistently clicked on the highlighted story with risk information across the pages. Auto-scrolling text and text size posed barriers to identification and comprehensive review for some of these participants. Participants generally found it more difficult to identify the drug's indications rather than the risks. We also found that participants using Instagram more frequently reported challenges identifying risks and indications compared to those using Facebook. So overall, UI or UX design features can facilitate or pose barriers to users' identification, review, and comprehension of information that's provided on social media pages and posts. And while this project was specific to prescription drug information, this type of methodology that we use could definitely go into the food environment as well. And I will now turn it over to Brian Southwell.
Great, thanks, Kristen. So I want to talk to you about one last set of studies here, but also to put this larger talk today into a little bit of broader context as well. And that part of what we're trying to do here is actually put a spotlight on decades of work that I think has been done in a very rigorous way that I think is broadly applicable to lots of different audiences, and I think hopefully you're seeing some different points of connection here today that we've seen in talking with iFans about our work. And so this last section, we want to talk about a question which is quite relevant given the complex information environment that we face now, which stems from the idea that sometimes people encounter information which is inaccurate, which turns out to later be misleading in some ways or needs to be corrected. And this poses a really interesting context and opportunity to understand how consumers engage with information. And it's something that I think you'll see here as lots of implications for ways that we engage with consumers over time and really respect their interest in having an accurate perception, but also finding out ways to best work alongside them to get to that point. So if you move to the next slide here, Kristen. Broadly speaking, the sets of studies that I want to talk about here relate to ways in which we can help consumers ultimately make sense of and navigate and cope with confusing claims and claims that have been deemed to be inaccurate. And the question for us is whether or not misperceptions can be corrected. Can they be corrected without causing undue harm? Can they be corrected in ways that make sense while still allowing consumers to engage with information about products that they might be interested in? And what we're going to reflect on here in this last part of our discussion are a series of studies that RTI conducted with partners in the Food and Drug Administration that is directly focused on those questions in the context of prescription drugs, prescription drug direct-to-consumer advertising, but that also hold implication for ways in which consumers are navigating the information environment more broadly. We move to the next slide. So there's a particular aspect of our information environment in the United States, and there's a historical context here worth offering. So I'm going to just offer that for just a second. It turns out that advertising, as many of you know here, that it falls under the regulatory purview of the Food and Drug Administration, has to be truthful and non-misleading. And it's sometimes the case that ads don't meet those requirements. So the question then is what could be done potentially about that. One remedy that's been proposed is corrective advertising, instances where there might be advertising to actually suggest that particular claims that have been advertised in the past are not accurate. And this is actually quite an interesting possibility here, because there might be multiple ways to do this. There might be better and worse ways to do this. There's an even question as to whether or not this is useful at all. And we've endeavored for about the last 15 years or so to answer some of those questions with a series of studies that we can talk about. So the broader background here is that this has been a issue for the Food and Drug Administration to consider really since the late 1970s. If you move to the next slide, I'll offer a historical context on that. In the mid 1970s, there was a case against Listerine, specifically related to a particular claim that had been advertised previously. And on the basis of a ruling that was ultimately upheld in the 1978 Supreme Court case, there was an avenue deemed to be relevant and appropriate here moving forward to allow for corrective advertising, to suggest that there are instances where correction might make sense, to clarify past claims, to clarify risks and benefits of particular products. And that really sets the stage then for this over decades. And so if you move to the next slide, I want to talk about a series of studies, the first of which we published with collaborators in the Journal of Communication in 2015, and asked the question whether corrective advertising can work. And the short story here that we found with a very careful experimental effort was that, in fact, it is conceivable, it is possible to actually adjust consumer perceptions that may have related to an original ad that was in violation, and that those perceptions can be adjusted over time with subsequent corrective advertising. But there's some nuance here that I think is really important, and something that we found in this particular case. We engaged in an experiment with consumers in which some of them saw an ad that included claims of overstatement of efficacy, claims that a particular product worked in ways that perhaps wasn't warranted. There also were claims that were problematic because they essentially omitted larger context. For example, description of side effects that did not really go into extensive detail as to what those side effects might be. And we looked at both of those types of erroneous claims or problems in past claims. And what we found was that actually correction was easier in the case of overstatement than it was for omissions. And this makes sense from a cognitive standpoint, because on some level, in the case of an overstatement, you can call that out and directly point to that as having been an error. In the case of something that was left out of the earlier discussion, there's less of a spot in terms of cognitive traction perhaps for a corrective claim to actually be made. And that's something that we found in this particular case. Now, something else that's interesting about this study, though, is that it might be too simple of a comparison to simply look at folks who had been exposed to a violative ad and folks that have been exposed to a violative ad plus a corrective ad. Because what we're assuming in that simple design, which is we did something more complex here, but in that simple comparison, you're leaving out all that the consumer is bringing to the table in terms of their own perceptions, ideas that they might have formed on their own or had in a pre-existing way. So something that was, I think, noteworthy in this particular study is that we actually looked at a situation where a consumer did not see the violative ad per se. They only saw what might be labeled as a reminder ad, which simply put a spotlight on the brand name. And as it turns out, consumers actually do reach some conclusions on their own, because there are some perceptions and misperceptions that are associated simply with them seeing and interpreting a brand name. And so having that comparison group in the mix here was important. We were able to kind of discern what seemed to be attributable to the violative claims, what could be corrected with a corrective claim, but then also understanding that consumers themselves were bringing some ideas to the table. So if you move to the next slide, we also were able to replicate those those results in a second study, in which we looked at a couple of other dimensions here. We looked at, beyond the question of whether or not simply corrective ads could work, we also looked at whether it mattered if the corrective ad was filmed, for example, in the same location as the original violative ad. Do the characters in the ad appear in the same living room or in the same space, or are they in an entirely different context that might be cognitively jarring or useful depending on your vantage point. We also looked at whether or not it mattered if there was a large delay between the time of the original exposure to the violative ad and to the corrective ad. As it turns out, actually the dimensions of the ad did not have tremendous impact. We were able to find corrective possibilities in the case of, for example, similar or different ads in terms of the location. The delay also really didn't seem to undermine the possibility for correction, even if somebody was only seeing the corrective ad 6 months later. What seemed to happen in that particular case was, some of the original perceptions may have faded. People might have forgotten about them, over a 6 month period. And so when you prompted or reminded them of some of that, later with an ad exposure 6 months down the line, you did see a little bit of effect or the appearance of an enhanced correction with regards to benefit and risk information. Nonetheless, bottom line is that correction is possible, and that we're learning some really interesting things about the ways that consumer memory and perceptions work in doing this work. If you move on to the next slide, here, I want to return back to a point that I raised a moment ago, which is that it's really important to do this work recognizing that people aren't blank slates, that they bring particular ideas to the table. And that's something that we found and wrote about here in another paper that's appeared in a journal by the name of Communication Theory, in which we looked at the best ways to actually figure out when we could determine that people had rejected problematic claims, or what we might label as misinformation or erroneous claims. And it turns out to be really vital that we account for the baseline acceptance of claims, to begin with. To what extent do people, before they're ever exposed to an ad, believe certain, ideas or have certain perceptions, or what we might label as misperceptions in some case. And if you adjust for that, it turns out you get a much clearer picture of exactly what's going on that's attributable to consumer advertising per se. So it's another really important nuance that we've learned over time, with this work. If you move to the next slide, I'll talk just a moment about one other pragmatic reality that we've recognized along the way. We've looked at the question of whether or not disclosing certain nuanced information in advertisements can turn out to be important. And it turns out that people are able to read and comprehend those disclosures, and those have the intended effect of offering the right and useful contextual information for people to get the full understanding of a product. One of the challenges, though, is that people don't always notice those disclosures. So even in a study where we put them in bold text and with a strong asterisk there to kind of note that footnote, people aren't necessarily always reading those footnotes per se. And so in the cases where they are, they work. But it's generally the case that we found here that nuanced information can sometimes be difficult to bring to people's attention, which is something that many of the folks on this call today are going to understand and appreciate. But I think it's important here because it has implications for thinking about what's done and offered in a subtle or quick way in terms of trying to pack additional information into advertisements, which can be a challenge for consumers to process. Okay. So with that, I want to move to the next slide. And I'm going to open up the floor here for questions that you might have. One thing I do want to note before we move to that is that we've really enjoyed the chance to interact. We've had some really great exchanges in the past 2 webinars and follow-up conversations that people have raised. You're going to find email addresses here listed on the screen, so feel free to get in touch with any of us or to find us on places like LinkedIn. And we're happy to continue the conversation, knowing that an hour only allows us to get into just so much detail. A lot of the papers that we've quickly flashed on screen are available both through those QR codes and are available online in different different ways. So we're really happy to continue this conversation in a variety of different ways.